Its stood starts where everything in Egypt begins, the river. The Nile is less a body of water and more a spine, stretching long and thin like a ribbon of life tied tightly through the desert's dead heart. You're standing there barefoot in the silt. It's sticky between your toes. The morning sun is already sharp, and you're trying to keep a clay pot balanced on your head while a cousin curses the flies buzzing around your face. Civilization, it doesn't feel like it. Just mud, reeds, crocodiles, and the constant gamble of whether the river will rise enough or too much. But something is happening. Along this great, predictable, sacred Nile, small groups are clustering into villages. They were building mud brick homes, learning to coax wheat and barley from the black earth, and figuring out how to turn swampy reeds into baskets, sandals, even boats. You're part of this slow trickle of something larger than survival. You can feel it in the way your grandmother speaks to the river, pouring a few drops of beer into the current and whispering thanks, or maybe bribes. The Nile is moody after all. This is around 5000 BCE, and while folks up in Mesopotamia are playing with cuneiform and city walls, your people are building something less flashy, but arguably more stubborn. Egypt doesn't rush, it marinates. Your village is part of what scholars now call the Badarian culture, named after a modern town where all your broken pots and skeletons will be found 7,000 years later. You don't call it anything. You're just trying to keep goats from eating the flax crop and avoid dying of a snake bite. Your people are animists, spirit believers. You see divinity in everything. The sun that blisters your back is a god. The river that gives and floods is a god. The ibis that hunts along the bank is a messenger. The world is filled with patterns, and someone must be making them. By 4000 BC, villages have gotten bolder. You're seeing the rise of regional identities, kingdoms in miniature. In the north, the marshy delta breeds of people who worship fish and pile up oyster shells in ceremonial mounds. In the south, up the Nile near modern-day Luxor, people start calling their land Tasha Mao, the land of the rushes. It's hotter, rockier, and full of flint. You're from the south, and like everyone here, you quietly believe your neighbors in the north are weird swamp people. This is where it starts to get territorial. The southern clans develop a fascination with the color red, symbolizing life, power, blood. Chiefs wear red face paint and claim divine right. Battles between villages turn increasingly common. The chiefs get more powerful. They build tombs that look suspiciously like temples. They claim descent from mythical beings. And when they die, they're buried with little ivory carvings of people. Servants, you realize, for the afterlife. Some of those figurines have folded arms, like they don't exactly want to be there. But the real shift, the one you'll remember if you live long enough, is how death becomes something you can prepare for. Not just die and rot, but die and continue. At first, people are buried with food, a comb, maybe a clay bowl. But then someone gets the idea. Let's wrap the body, let's dry it, let's preserve it. And just like that, the slow Egyptian obsession with the afterlife begins to spiral. You live in a time before pharaohs, but not before kings. Your warlord has a name you chant before battle, and you've seen him sacrifice a goat at sunrise covered in ochre and arrogance. He has slaves, and he has a standard, a little pole topped with a carved animal. You're told to rally beneath it. This is tribal nationalism before the textbook existed. By 3300 BCE, people are burying their dead in straight lines with pottery arranged just so. They're importing lapis from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon. Your job, you're probably hauling it. You're a porter in a long caravan that snakes through the desert at night, that's guided by stars and half-flies about what's waiting across the sands. You hear whispers, one name, Scorpion King. No, not the Hollywood version, the real one. Maybe not even a king, just a powerful southern warlord who wears a white crown and carries a ceremonial mace. Maybe you saw him once, his face painted with ochre and his chest bare. Maybe you saw him swing that mace down on a northern rival's head. Or maybe it's just a tale you heard from a cousin who knows a priest who saw a tomb. Here's your quirky detail of the night. One of the earliest inscriptions we've found in Egypt is literally a name tag. Still, something in the air has shifted. The tombs are getting bigger, the battles more frequent, and the belief in divine kingship is creeping in, soft and slow like the Nile's flood. Soon, one of these warlords is going to unify the two lands and paint his victory in blood and myth. But for now, you just pull the cart, kiss your amulet before sleep, and dream of gods you don't yet know the names of. You wake to the sound of sandals crunching outside your hut. Messengers again. They're traveling with fan bearers and painted faces, shouting that another chief from the north has declared himself ruler of all the lands again. You've heard this story before, but lately there's a different kind of tension in the air, like something's about to snap into place. Your region, Upper Egypt, the narrow ribbon of land along the southern Nile, has grown aggressive. It's not just fending off its northern neighbors anymore. Your warlords are reaching north, building alliances, swallowing towns like mouthfuls of pomegranate seeds. Names echo across the reed beds. Iri Kar Scorpion II. Some of them leave behind mysterious symbols on pottery and tomb walls. Early hints of writing, though no one you know can read them yet. You helped scratch one into a clay jar once, not knowing it's the ancestor of hieroglyphs. This is the Narapata III period, and you're living through the very birth of dynastic rule. You're conscripted, not into a battle yet, but into a project. You and 50 others are dragged north to help build a ceremonial road near Abydos, a sacred burial site that's growing larger by the season. You don't understand why. All you know is that the graves are no longer pits, but chambers lined with planks of imported wood and stocked with offerings. Your job is to carry stones and not ask why some tombs require 10 men to close, or why the officials building them wear red sashes and carry badges with strange animal symbols. Falcons, fish, bulls. You start hearing a new name whispered like a warning or a prayer. Nama. No one agrees where Nama comes from exactly. Either way, you know this much. He's real, and he doesn't smile. The stories trickle in before he does. He crushed the Delta tribes, flooded enemy fields with dammed river water, executed rivals in front of their own priests. You half expect him to be a monster, but when he finally marches through your village, he's a lean man in a leopard skin cloak with a high crown and a crooked staff. His eyes are unreadable. You drop to one knee. It's instinct. Fear? Sure, but also awe. You're there, or close enough, when Nair's name becomes legend. It happens on a battlefield up north on the border of the Delta marshes. The story retold 1,000 times and carved in smooth slate says that Narma smashes the skull of a Delta king with a ceremonial mace while wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Later, he dons the red crown of the north. Together, they form a single icon of power. The two lands now one. The Nama palette, the famous one found centuries later, is just a fancy record of that victory. You just remember the blood and the feast afterward, and how the crocodiles in the Nile ate well that night. Afterward, Nama builds a capital at Memphis, right at the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. Strategic and symbolic, you're sent there to help hold Sid's stone. You can't help but notice how different it feels. Humid, buzzing with flies and commerce. There are traders here from Canaan, maybe even from further east. You hear languages you can't understand. You eat dates so sweet they sting your teeth. This city, they say, is the hinge on which Egypt will swing for centuries. Nama might be the same person as Menes, the legendary first pharaoh listed by later scribes. The conqueror and Men is the administrator who came after, tidying up the bloody mess. Here's tonight's open debate. Was unification a single event or a process spread over decades, maybe even centuries? The palette shows a clean narrative. One battle, one victory, one king. But when you're living it, it feels like 1,000 tiny battles, a slow erasing of borders, a long inhale before something vast and ancient begins to speak with one voice. You see new symbols, standardized writing carved into jars and painted on walls. You help dig canals near Memphis, redirecting the Nile's seasonal floods. Everything is suddenly organized, and the man at the top, he's not just a king anymore, he's divine. You don't fully understand it yet. When he dies, he will rise. You hear rumors of a tomb unlike any before, deeper, wider, hidden beneath layers of stone and offerings. It won't be the last. And so, under his rule, Egypt becomes a nation, not just a line of villages along a lazy river, but a kingdom with borders, taxes, irrigation, and destiny. You stand on a hill and watch the black floodplain shimmer under the sun, and for the first time, you feel something like pride. You're older now. The sun hasn't gotten any cooler, but your back aches more when you lift stones. Egypt is no longer a scattered patchwork of villages. It's a state, an actual functioning kingdom. And you're a cog in its divine grinding machinery. The land is now ruled by the first dynasty. Everything you do somehow somewhere flows back to the will of the king. You see it in the grain taxes. They're heavier now, but they arrive with order. Clerks with shaved heads and ink-stained fingers tally your harvest in quick practice strokes. You're conscripted again to haul stones and wood towards the growing necropolis at Abydos. This is where they bury kings now. Not just in simple graves, but in grand enclosures, mastabus they're called. Flat-roofed, sloped-walled tombs that mark not just death, but a new kind of life. You work on one of them, maybe even for Jay, the third king of this first dynasty, or for his son Jet. The names blur together, but the ambition doesn't. These tombs have dozens of rooms, hidden compartments, ceremonial entrances, and beside them pits with people in them. This is the part no one likes to talk about. When the king dies, he doesn't go alone. Servants, wives, guards, even pet dogs. Right then, right after the funeral, you see it once, not close, but close enough. Procession of drugged faces, calm and quiet, as if they have already crossed some invisible border. They are led down into a chamber, seated and left. You don't sleep well that night. Here's your historical fact. Dair, one of the earliest pharaohs, reigned for possibly 50 years and expanded Egypt's control as far south as Nubia. His tomb is enormous. Later Egyptians believed it belonged to Osiris himself, and you helped build it. Lucky you. And now your quirky fact. Early kings didn't just have tombs, they had cenotaphs, fake tombs, decoy burial sites to confuse grave robbers and mislead the underworld. You once spent a week building one, not realizing it was completely empty, except for a pile of useless pottery and a decoy sarcophagus filled with sand. You're still not sure if it was brilliant or deeply petty. Back in your daily life, things have started to change in other ways too. You wear linen now instead of animal skins. You shave your head because lice are a nuisance and hot sand sticks to hair like glue. You smell of beer and onions and dust. You pray more often, not just to the Nile anymore, but to gods with faces. Fulcans, jackals, cats, crocodiles, Horus, Nubis, Bastet, Sobek. You've got a tiny amulet around your neck, probably a wad eye to protect you from curses and Saki bites and heartbreak. There's a growing sense that your life is watched, measured, judged by powers beyond this world. Writing is spreading. You still don't read, but you've watched scribes work. They paint tiny, beautiful pictures onto the papyrus scrolls and limestone tablets. Birds, snakes, zigzag waterlines, eyes, thrones, and spirals. They say each picture has meaning, magic even. Your name might be among them somewhere, written phonetically, and signs that echo your voice across centuries. One day, while digging for stone near Saqqara, you and your crew uncover something strange. A box with carvings no one understands. It turns, the Nile is reliable, but wild. Each year it floods. Each year it retreats. Still, Egypt endures. It's getting stronger, more centralized, more obsessed with control. The king is the Nesu bit now, the jewel king. You're just trying to keep your house from collapsing under the weight of rivers and family drama. Egypt is becoming eternal, or at least it thinks it is. Temples rise, tombs multiply, priests get wealthier, and stonework gets more ambitious. At night, as you sit by the river, the stars above you reflect perfectly in the black water. Someone tells you their souls. All you know is that the river keeps flowing, and tomorrow you'll rise again with the sun and keep building the kingdom that's now buried in your bones. You're 25 years into your service when something astonishing happens. Someone decides to stack the dead, not bury them in long horizontal tombs with sloping walls and low ceiling chambers, but to build upward. It starts as a rumor. Some architect, probably mad from too much sun and ambition, has convinced the pharaoh to build a tomb unlike any ever seen. A step pyramid, they're calling it. You don't know what that means yet, but you're already assigned to the crew. The pharaoh is Djoser, and whether you love him or hate him depends on how blistered your hands are on any given day. He's not the most warlike ruler, but he's focused, obsessed really, with the idea of eternity. This one hires a man named Imhotep. Imhotep isn't a warrior or noble. He's something else entirely. A thinker, high priest, an architect, maybe even a physician. You see him once striding across the sand in linen so clean it actually reflects the sun. His eyes are narrow, calculating. He doesn't shout, he doesn't need to. The entire site moves at the pace of his thoughts. You're sent to Saqqara. Blocks of limestone are cut and dragged in from quarries miles away. Ropes snap, men faint, but the structure begins to rise. First a square mastaba, then another layer and another. You pause one day and realize it's a stairway, a giant gleaming staircase for the king's soul to climb to the stars. This thing is massive, bigger than anything you've ever seen. You don't know it, but it'll stand for thousands of years. Imhotep doesn't just build a tomb, he builds a complex, temples, courtyards, ceremonial gates, underground chambers deep enough to make your ears pop. You spend weeks in the dark, digging passageways lined with blue glazed tiles that shimmer in torchlight like the belly of a river god. Here's your historical fact. The Step Pyramid of Djoser is the first monumental stone building in human history, and you, lucky you, were part of it. Now, your quirky fact. Somewhere deep in the Step Pyramid complex, there's a chamber that wasn't meant for the king, but for his liver. But here's the scholarly debate. Was Imhotep truly the architect of the pyramid, or just later glorified as one? Some argue he was a genius polymath. Others think the legend of Imhotep grew larger than the man. Later Egyptians will even worship him as a god of healing and wisdom. You once heard a worker say that Imhotep knew the secret names of the stars. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds important. In daily life, the pyramid changes everything. You're suddenly part of something much bigger than labor. You're part of a national project. Workers from across Egypt come together. Men from the Delta, men from Nubia, craftsmen from the Oasis. It's chaotic, sure. Fights break out, but slowly you begin to share a culture. Common jokes, songs, curses. You speak different dialects, but everyone knows the phrase, watch the block. You trade amulets. You fall in love with a stonecutter's daughter who paints her eyes with green malachite and laughs like she's hiding something. You sprain your ankle hauling limestone and are treated by a healer who presses warm papyrus and honey on the swelling. You see men die. You see new gods rise. Jose doesn't just pee brands. His name is everywhere on seals, tablets, jars, doorways. He's no longer just a king. He's a divine ruler with a temple cult and a future. Priests perform rituals in his name while he's still alive. You begin to understand that kings here are not men with power. They are power itself, incarnate in bone and voice. You hear stories that Yosha was deeply loved or deeply feared or both, that he visited the temples barefoot, that he once fasted for 30 days, that he personally blessed the Nile during a 7-year drought. That last one is probably false, but it makes you wonder. Meanwhile, your body ages faster than you expected. The heat never forgives. Your hands are hard, your hearing dull, but your memory sharpens. You start teaching younger workers how to pull ropes without breaking fingers. You point out weak seams in stone before they crack. They call you Abu, father. You pretend not to like it. One night during a break, you climb halfway up the rising pyramid, just far enough to see the whole desert sprawled out under a sky so black it looks painted. You sit there with your bruised knees and your calloused hands, and you feel something odd. Not pride exactly, something quieter. You are part of something that might actually last. You don't live to see the completion. Most of your generation doesn't, but word reaches your village years later. It's done. White limestone gleams in the sun, a staircase to the gods. They say you can see it from miles away. They say Jose was buried with thousands of offerings and a model of his entire palace. They say it's just the beginning, and they're right. Soon others will try to top it, build higher, go smoother, reach closer to the gods. But this is the moment right here when Egypt decides that death isn't the end. It's an engine, and the king, he's the driver. You just help lay the tracks. You've never seen so much limestone in your life, not even in dreams, not even in nightmares. Because this next pharaoh, he isn't satisfied with steps. He wants smooth sides, clean angles, a true pyramid, flawless, gleaming, god-tier geometry rising from the earth like a divine exclamation mark. And guess what? You're back on the crew. The king's name is Senfru, and if Djoser was the quiet visionary type, Senfru is something else entirely. Charming, bold, endlessly ambitious. He's the kind of guy who flashes a grin before ordering you to move a 20-ton block by sundown. He rules with style. Less aloof god, more high-energy CEO of Egypt Incorporated. You get the feeling he actually enjoys this whole being pharaoh thing. He starts his pyramid quest at a place called Midam. The project is already half built when he takes over, and he decides to finish it, but differently. You're there when the top begins to crack, when the outer layers start peeling away like sunburnt skin. The whole thing collapses partially. Anyway, now it looks like a giant tower with its guts showing. You call it the collapse pyramid. Not officially, of course, not out loud, but Senfu doesn't quit, he just pivots. Over at a new site in Dasha, he orders a second attempt. This time, the pyramid rises fast. You haul blocks under a sun that fries your scalp alongside thousands of other workers. The angle is sharp, aggressive, too sharp if you're being honest. The higher it goes, the more nervous the architects look. Then one day, it happens. Someone miscalculates. The structure begins to show stress. Cracks spider across the upper blocks. The builders panic. The priests suggest divine displeasure, and the angle shifts, literally. The pyramid suddenly flattens halfway up, as if it had second thoughts about its own ambitions. And just like that, the bent pyramid is born. Here's your historical fact. The bent pyramid is the first pyramid with smooth sides. Kind of. It begins at a steep 54 degrees angle, then abruptly changes to 43 degrees about halfway up. Scholars still debate whether it was an engineering correction or a deliberate symbolic choice. You're pretty sure it was panic. Now for the weird detail. The bent pyramid still has its polished limestone casing almost fully intact. Thousands of years later, it gleams in the desert like a relic from a dream. You once cut your hand on one of those outer stones, left a scar. You tell everyone it was from a lion. They don't believe you, but they like the story. As for scholarly debate, some think the pyramid's bend was due to structural failure. Others believe it was a ritual design meant to imitate the rays of the sun. A few even claimed Senfru wanted to link two different pyramid styles into one. You personally think he just didn't want to admit a mistake. But Senfru still isn't done. He wants more. So he builds another pyramid also at Dashur. This time the angles are conservative, the foundation's solid. It goes up clean, steady, and against all odds. It works. The red pyramid is born, and you get to see something extraordinary. A successful, massive, smooth-side pyramid standing over 100 meters tall, glittering under a desert sun that seems less cruel for once. They call it red because the limestone inside has a pinkish hue like sunset trapped in stone, but most of it is covered in white casing blocks, now mostly stolen by time and villagers. The chambers inside echo when you breathe. You once snuck inside during a festival and swore you heard your own heartbeat bouncing back at you from the walls. By this point, you're part of the elite crew. Not rich, not royal, but skilled. You know how to haul stone without snapping your back. You understand pulley angles, incline ramps, how to sand down the top of a block with wet sandstone until it fits like a puzzle piece. Younger workers ask you questions. You tell them stories while they chew on roasted garlic and try not to pass out. One day, as you pause to drink water from a goat skin pouch, a scribe asks you what it feels like to build something eternal. You shrug, say something about sore feet. But later that night, you think about it. Maybe it does matter. Maybe the gods do notice. Snufru, by the way, becomes a legend in his own time. He rules for possibly 50 years and oversees more pyramid construction than any other pharaoh. You hear whispers that his reign was unusually peaceful, that he preferred building and trading to conquering, that he once walked among his workers disguised as a commoner, that he liked music and poetry and women who could speak their minds. He sounds more like a story than a man. Still, his building spree costs Egypt a fortune. The royal treasuries groan, priests grumble, but the legacy is set. By the end of Neferu's reign, Egypt has cracked the code of pyramid building. The logistics are in place. The labor systems are running like gears in a giant stone clock. And the next king, he inherits all of it. So now Egypt is ready to build something that will outlive empires, ready to take the lessons of the step pyramid, the bent pyramid, and the red pyramid, and go even bigger, even bolder. But you're just trying to stay alive long enough to see it. At night, you lie beside a cooking fire, belly full of lentils and sour bread, and you stare up at the stars. The constellation of Orion rises in the east, and someone tells you it's the soul of a great king. Maybe it is. You feel small, but not unimportant. Your hands hurt, your knees creak, but the stones you set today might be climbed by gods tomorrow. The morning sun creeps across the desert like a glowing blade, cutting through the haze as you trudge toward a site that's already being called the project to end all projects. You've worked under kings before. You've sweated through pyramid constructions, cursed architects in 3 languages, and survived the Great Bent disaster. But this one feels different. There's something in the air. Maybe pride, maybe madness. The king is Khufu, son of Snefu, and from the moment he takes the throne, it's clear he's inherited his father's taste for building, only without the smile. Khufu doesn't want charm, he wants awe. You hear the priests say he's favored by Ra himself. The sun god speaks through him. They whisper, and the shape of the next pyramid has come to him in a dream, burning with light. You arrive at the Giza Plateau with 1,000 others squinting at the dusty rise of land that will soon become the most famous graveyard in human history. Right now, it's just rock and scrub, but in a few decades, it will house the Great Pyramid, the one that makes people thousands of years from now stare at their screens and ask, how did they even build that? You'll know because you're here, and it's already insane. The plans handed down by Khufu's vassals call for over 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. These aren't gentle little clay bricks. These are shoulder-breaking, ankle-crushing, life-risking monsters. You're assigned to a hauling team, ropes, sleds, levers, and a lot of yelling. No wheels. The Nile's been flooded just right to float blocks in from nearby quarries, but from the riverbank to the rising pyramid is a long, grueling uphill battle, literally. There's a sort of ramp, broad, packed with mud and sand, winding around the growing structure like a lazy serpent. You help maintain it, hauling clay in baskets and constantly refilling sections where the sun has dried it into flaking powder. The higher the pyramid rises, the longer and more complex the ramp becomes. Sometimes it feels like you're building the ramp more than the pyramid. And Khufu, he doesn't visit often, but when he does, everyone stiffens like a drawn bow ring. He doesn't smile, he doesn't wave, he watches in silence, eyes sharp, lips pressed in a line that says, "You're building me." Here's your historical fact. The Great Pyramid of Giza stood as the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. At over 146 meters high in its original state, it's aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points and constructed with mind-melting precision. The base sides vary by less than 5 centimeters. You helped align those, by the way. Spent days holding plumb lines and squinting into them. Now for the quirky detail. Khufu had a boat buried next to his pyramid. A full-size solar bark, 140 feet long, disassembled into over 1,000 pieces. You once worked near the pit long before anyone realized what was buried inside. You thought it was just a ceremonial ditch. Now you know it was his spaceship to the afterlife. But of course, we can't leave out the scholarly debate. Khufu's reputation is murky. Later generations called him a cruel tyrant, a builder of egotistical monstrosities, but the evidence is thin. There are no records of mass suffering or forced slavery, despite the popular myth. Some scholars argue he was simply a strict ruler with a monumental vision. Others think he was as ruthless as his pyramid is huge. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between. And speaking of myths, no, aliens didn't build it. Sorry, you saw it happen. Day after blistering day, it was you, your neighbors, and a few thousand other sunburned maniacs with ropes, copper chisels, and a truly irrational commitment to precision. The aliens never showed up. They wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes in that dust storm you got caught in last month. Life at the Giza site is his own little city. There are bakeries churning out thousands of loaves a day, breweries bubbling with thick barley beer, medical tents full of herbs and shouting. You know a healer named Nebbit who makes picases from honey and garlic and once set your broken finger with a twig and a prayer. The workers live in long rows of mud brick houses. You share yours with 8 others. Loud snorers, decent gamblers, terrible singers. You work 10 days at a time, then get a rest day. On those rare breaks, you climb to the edge of the plateau and stare out at the Nile, shining like a god's vein across the earth. Sometimes you see your village far in the distance and a blur of green in the sand. You wonder if they can see the pyramid yet. You wonder if your mother believes you're helping build something that will outlive even the gods. Inside the pyramid, yes, inside you've helped carve chambers. There's the king's chamber, massive and lined with red granite, dragged all the way from Assen, and the queen's chamber, smaller and misnamed. Then there's the grand gallery, a corridor so vast you feel like an ant inside a throat. The echo of footsteps follows you like a whispering ghost. One of your friends says the pharaoh will walk this corridor in spirit straight into the stars. You don't say it aloud, but sometimes you wonder if it's all too much. If a tomb really needs this much math, this much stone, this much sweat. But then you remember, this isn't just a tomb. It's a message, a declaration, a monument that says, here was Egypt. Here stood a god. When the last stone is placed, when the golden cap gleams in the desert light, you're no longer young. You've given decades of your life to this triangle of madness. You've lost friends in collapses. You've burned your hands raw. You've aged fast, but you've also built something that even time will hesitate to touch. They say Khufu is buried deep inside, but no one really knows where. Maybe it's a secret chamber. Maybe he's not there at all. Maybe that's the point. The mystery is part of the power. At night, you sit on a rock facing the pyramid, now complete, now forever. A breeze kicks up sand, and for a moment, the massive structure seems to shimmer, less a thing of stone, more a dream in the shape of a mountain. You wonder what people thousands of years from now will think. Will they still ask how it was made? Will they still feel that strange quiet awe? They will. And you are here. The pyramid is finished, but Egypt doesn't stop. You thought that was the peak, the crowning jewel of a god-king's ego. Turns out it was just a warm-up. Life continues. The Nile still floods, crops still grow, and people still argue over who stole whose donkey, and you've returned home, years older, joints creaking, fingers crooked from too many rope burns. But strangely enough, you miss the sound of chisels and shouted measurements. You're not ready to rot in a village just yet, so you find work closer to home. Not hauling stone for kings, but building tombs for merchants. Painting walls in mud brick chapels, crafting statues from cheap wood instead of imported stone. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. And as you settle into this new rhythm, you begin to notice something that wasn't as obvious back at Giza. Regular people are living like pharaohs, or at least pretending to. Everyone wants a good afterlife now. Not just the kings, farmers, priests, even mid-level scribes. Everyone's planning their own journey to eternity. Tombs aren't just for the royal anymore. You help carve false doors, little windows through which souls can pass between worlds. You paint offerings on walls, baskets of bread, roasted ducks, jars of beer. One man insists on including a painting of himself fishing. I want to fish forever, he says without irony. You paint it anyway. Here's your historical fact. During the 5th and 6th dynasties, the mortuary cult expanded massively. People of the upper and middle classes began commissioning their own tombs and chapels, and priests performed regular rituals to maintain the dead's favor in the afterlife. Death became a bureaucracy, a business, and you're suddenly in demand. Here's something quirky. You once helped bury a man with a mummified monkey. Not a sacred baboon, not an offering, just a pet monkey wrapped in linen and placed beside him with a little jar of honey and a flute. He loved that damn monkey, his son said. Wouldn't go anywhere without it. You never forgot that burial. You still hum the flute tune sometimes. Now, let's get into the scholarly mess. Egyptologists still argue about how deeply religious belief actually ran among common people during the Old Kingdom. Some say the tomb inscriptions were just for show, that only the elite understood the rituals. Others believe average Egyptians had a rich, if unwritten, spiritual life centered on local deities and folk practices. You've seen both. Priests who recite every word perfectly without believing a syllable, and toothless old women who mutter prayers over onions like they're sacred scrolls. You're carving more now than hauling. Your hands remember the chisel better than your back remembers the ramp. You're part of a crew that travels from tomb to tomb, helping families prepare for eternity. You know how to paint the blue lotus just right, how to mix red ochre to match the exact shade of the sun god's robes. Some days you feel more artist than laborer. You also start to see how Egypt runs, not from the top down, but through 1,000 little gears. Overseers, scribes, temple staff, market inspectors. There's an official title for everything now, and every title comes with a seal, a tax, and a line in someone's tomb. Scribe of the granaries, supervisor of the canal mouth, deputy of the chief of beers. You're pretty sure that last one is made up, but he paid well. And life is full. You eat better now. Lentils, bread, fish, occasionally goat. Your home has 2 rooms and a mud roof that doesn't leak unless the wind hits just right. You sleep beside someone who smells like herbs and talks in her sleep. You have a son who's too clever for his own good, and a daughter who says she wants to be a priestess because they get to wear white all the time. You don't argue. Your favorite time of year is the inundation when the Nile overflows and the fields become temporary lakes. Work pauses. Everyone relaxes. There's music, beer, laughter that comes from the belly. You sit on a roof with neighbors and watch the water rise. Someone plays a flute. Someone else tries to dance and falls off a barrel. The stars come out and they look just like the ceiling of that tomb you painted last month. You think about the dead more often now, not out of fear, but familiarity. You've helped prepare dozens of burials, some elaborate, some barely more than a mat and a handful of grain. You start to believe that what matters most isn't the tomb or the spells or even the statues. It's being remembered. You make a promise to yourself that you'll carve names carefully. Never rush the script because that's how someone stays alive. One day, you're asked to help on a royal project again. Not a pyramid this time, but a temple near the king's son's sanctuary. The pharaoh is Usiakaf, and he started something new, worshipping the sun in the open air. No roof, just giant obelisks, altars, and wide courtyards facing the dawn. You're not sure how you feel about it. The priests say Ra watches from the horizon, and that your work here is seen with divine eyes. You nod and keep chiseling. There's talk now that the pharaoh is no longer just Horus incarnate, but the son of Ra, born from the goddess Sky. You're not great with theology, but you understand this. The king is getting shinier, more godlike, harder to approach. He's a concept now, not a man. You miss the rough charisma of Nefru, the cold ambition of Khufu. These new kings feel more distant. You meet a man who writes prayers for hire, custom ones. He'll compose a spell just for your tomb with your name slipped in. He offers to write one for you. You can't afford the deluxe version, but you buy a short one anyway. You don't tell anyone, but you keep the little scrap of papyrus hidden in your tools. It starts, "May your name be spoken when the stars return." At night, you watch your children sleep, curled up in blankets that still smell faintly of limestone and paint. You listen to the soft rush of the river, the crickets, the low call of an owl. You think about the old pyramid at Giza glowing white under moonlight. about the tombs you helped carve, about the monkey with the flute, and you wonder, not with fear, but with curiosity, what your own journey to the West will look like. You've lived a builder's life, a painter's life, a father's life, not grand, but honest, not eternal, but meaningful. And in this Egypt, where memory is power and names are sacred, maybe that's enough. There's a kind of silence that creeps over Egypt, not the soft, sleepy kind that hums beneath the stars, but a tense, breath-holding hush, like the whole land is waiting for something to break. You've felt it growing for years now. The pharaohs don't seem quite as divine anymore. The pyramids still stand, but their power is more shadow than substance. Temples fall behind on their rituals. Priests argue over offerings, and out in the villages, you see more empty hands and fewer full granaries. You've seen this before. Tight harvests, low floods, anxious glances at the sky. But this time something feels different. The Nile has turned fickle, its floods no longer as reliable. The great machine of Egypt, built on balance of May at the sacred order, is creaking. You're older now, maybe too old for hauling or chiseling, but still sharp. You sit with other gay-haired workers outside the granaries and let listeners' whispers start to slither through the crowd like snakes in tall grass. It begins quietly. Shipments of grain that never arrive, tombs left unfinished, a tax collector who vanishes mid-route, but then the stories turn darker. Entire nomes, regional districts where the local governors refuse to answer summons from Memphis. Reports of bandits on the roads, caravans looted, and then even worse, stories of famine, crops dying in the fields, families moving south in search of food. You catch rumors that in some places people have eaten their leather sandals. The pharaoh at the time, Pepe, has been king for as long as anyone can remember. Literally. You were a teenager when he took the throne. Now you're nearing your final years, and he's still ruling, though no one has seen him in public for a long time. Some say he's over 90. Others whisper he died years ago, and that priests are using his name to keep power flowing through their cold fingers. Here's your historical fact. Pepet is believed to have ruled for over 90 years, the longest reign of any monarch in history. At first, this was seen as a golden era of stability, but by the end of his reign, Egypt had begun to unravel. Authority fragmented. Local leaders, the noarchs, grew powerful and independent, hoarding resources and ignoring royal decrees. And your quirky fact, one of the few surviving letters from Pepe's youth, is a note thanking a general for bringing him a dancing pygmy from the land of Punt. The boy king was delighted. It's one of the earliest documented examples of royal entertainment, and it now reads like a tragic artifact of a fading empire where the king played while the kingdom cracked. As for the debate, scholars are still unsure exactly why the Old Kingdom collapsed. Was it the changing climate and low Nile floods, the oifid bloated bureaucracy, the failure of divine kingship to adapt, or maybe it was just time? Empires don't last forever. No matter how much stone you stack, you watch it happen slowly. The royal tombs shrink, the temples grow quieter, priests begin to hedge their bets, invoking older gods, lesser gods, any gods. You find yourself doing the same. You whisper prayers to Osiris at night, but also to your ancestors, to the river, to the stars. You're not even sure who's listening anymore. One morning, you walk past a once busy temple and see the doors open, the offering tables empty, jackals sniffing where bread once lay. The priest inside doesn't chase them away. He just watches. When you ask him what's going on, he shrugs and says, Ra rises, Ra sets, but Ra no longer pays for repairs. The streets of Memphis are different now. More guarded, more desperate. You've taken to selling charms and inscripted prayers in the market. Some work, some don't. You make up half the spells yourself. People still buy them. Faith is a currency when the economy collapses. You hear of a governor in a suit who's declared himself king of the region. Another in Thebes claims to be the rightful heir of the sun. They mint their own seals, issue orders, build small armies. Egypt begins to look less like a kingdom and more like a chessboard in mid-fight. Pieces scattered, rules forgotten. This is the first intermediate period, though no one calls it that yet. To you, it's just chaos survival. The kingship has shattered. One by one, the gnomes become little kingdoms run by men who claim divine favor and swing swords like they mean it. Some are kind, some are tyrants, all are desperate. And yet, Egypt doesn't die. You visit a village near Abydos and find a family still building a tiny tomb chapel. The father carves it with his sons. The mother tends a garden of onions and blue lotus. They invite you for bread and lentils. "We still believe," the father says simply, tapping the wall where he's carved his name. That has to be enough. You believe it, too, because even as the pyramids crumble, even as war bands patrol the roads and food becomes scarcer, people still build, still carve, still write their names into the future. You're no longer working with stone. Your hands are too old, too swollen. But you train a few apprentices. You show them how to draw straight lines without measuring, how to smooth a surface with river clay, how to mix paint with crushed copper and spit. They call you teacher, and you try not to let it go to your head. One night, a boy from your old village appears at your door. He says, "Your son has joined one of the new armies, marching with a local nomarch who promises to restore Egypt." You feel something crack inside, but you say nothing. You just nod. You always knew the next generation would try to fix what yours let fall apart. And so you sit by the river as the sun sets in golden shadow. You think of the days of Joseph and Sinfu and Khufu, the white pyramids rising from the sand bee. You remember the roar of stone on ramps, the song of chisels, the quiet dignity of a carved name. Egypt is in pieces now, yes, but the people remember. They keep the fire alive in little shrines, in carved scarabs, in stories told over cracked bowls of porridge. And you know somehow, someway, the river will rise again. The order will return because this land has memory, and memory is stronger than stone. You wake to the sound of nothing. No stone cutting, no chanting, no shouts from temple courtyards to bulls, just wind and the rustle of palm leaves. The Egypt you once helped build has gone strangely quiet. It's not peace of cess exactly. It's exhaustion. The civil wars, the failed harvests, the battles between nomarchs and warlords have stretched on for generations now, and the dream of a unified land ruled by a living God. That feels like something from the age of your grandfather's grandfather. You live in the margins now in a village between what used to be two powerful gnomes. The border's meaningless these days. The tax collectors stopped coming years ago, and the roads are mostly just bandit paths dressed in dust. People whisper of kings, but you've never seen one. There's a man to the north claiming rule in Heracleopolis, another down south in Thebes, and a dozen in between who crown themselves in private, then die in public. The only crown that really matters is whether you can keep the bread rising. The young are restless. Your own grandchildren are growing up in a world with no clear center. They don't know what it means to bow before a real pharaoh. They've never seen Memphis at its peak. They know nothing of Nefru's crooked pyramid or Khufu's mountain of stone. You try to tell them stories, how Egypt once breathed with one heart, but they roll their eyes and go back to carving little boats out of palm wood. That was then, they say. We live now. Now is hard, but not hopeless. Here's your historical fact. During the first intermediate period, Egypt fractured into rival kingdoms. Heracles controlled the north for a time, while Thebes in the south slowly rose in strength. In between, chaos reigned. But even in the collapse, art continued. Tombs were still carved. Temples, though smaller, still echoed with prayers. Egypt bent it, but didn't break. Here's your quirky tidbit. In this period, some burial coffins included false doors that were painted rather than carved. That's right, people couldn't afford stone anymore, so they painted illusions of wealth onto wooden planks. A painted feast, a painted priest, even painted jars of beer. You once helped make one. The family paid in onions and a comb made from giraffe bone. It was surprisingly beautiful. And now the scholarly question, was this really a dark age? Some argue that the first intermediate period was full of suffering and fragmentation. Others point out that it was also a time of innovation, decentralization, and regional pride. Without a pharaoh demanding all the stone and labor, smaller communities flourished in their own ways. You've seen both sides. You've walked through famine-struck towns, and you've carved tombs for proud goat herders who claim their ancestors were kings. You find work again, strangely enough. A local scribe needs someone to help inscribe prayers on a rock-cut tomb. It's not fancy, but it's heartfelt. The man is a butcher's son who made good money raising geese and wants to be remembered. He asks you to paint him seated with his wife surrounded by children, holding a lotus in one hand and a jar of beer in the other. "Let me laugh forever," he says. You make the smile on his face just a little too wide. It feels right. Thieves starts making noise. Serious noise. You hear travelers muttering that it's king. A man named Inta is not just talking about uniting Egypt. He's marching quietly, cautiously, but with purpose. The South remembers. You can feel it. The memory of the old gods, the old ways, the old dignity. It runs deeper in the Nile's southern curve. Thebes has its own gods, its own shrines, its own vision of what Egypt could be again. You send your grandson to Thebes with a caravan of stone tools. He returns months later, sunburnt and wild-eyed. They're building again, Lee says. Not pyramids, but something better, something alive. You wonder. And then one day, a man arrives in your village. Not with soldiers or threats, but with scrolls. He stands in the square and reads aloud from a new king's decree. Menuetep is his name, and he claims to have ended the division. He has marched north, defeated Heracles Cleopolulus, and reunited the two lands. You watch the villagers shift, uncertain whether to cheer or keep sharpening their knives. But when the man unrolls a map showing a single, unbroken line from Nubia to the Delta, the crowd hushes. One man drops to his knees, another claps his hands. You just close your eyes and let the wind blow over your face. Egypt is whole again after all this time. Here's what's wild. Menuertepu from Thebes becomes not just a king, but a restorer. His name literally means Menthu is satisfied and the god of war probably is. After years of brokenness, Egypt has a center again, a capital, a focus. The king builds a mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, carved into the cliffs above the Nile, flanked by terraces and colonnades that seem to grow out of the rock itself. You never see it in person, but a traveler shows you a sketch drawn in charcoal. You stare at it for a long time. There's a new energy now. Soldiers patrol the roads again, not raiding but protecting. Scribal schools open. Farmers are paid for surplus grain. You visit a blacksmith who tells you he's working on iron tools for the first time. The king says, "We'll plant where we've never planted before," he says, tapping his anvil-like punctuation. Even the gods seem louder. In Thebes, Amun-Ra is rising. Once a local wind god, now swelling into a national deity. His priests are getting bolder. You're skeptical at first, but when your youngest granddaughter gets a fever and recovers after a prayer to Amun, you change your tune a bit. You add a tiny wooden statue of him to your home shrine just in case. You think back to the old days, the golden age of pyramids, the long shadow of Khufu's mountain of stone. This doesn't feel like that. It feels smaller, yes, but also more human. The kings walk among people again. They don't just rule from golden thrones. They inspect irrigation ditches and commission walls for towns long forgotten. The new Egypt is practical, less divine, more grounded. And yet, it's still Egypt, still a land of order, of ritual, of dreaming stone into shape. Still a land where your name carved into a wall is a passport to eternity. You sit by the river one evening, legs stretched, clay cup of beer in hand. A fisherman hums a song you knew as a boy. The stars above are sharp, unblinking steady. The wind smells of lotus and silt, and you feel something in your chest, a peace maybe, or a pause. Egypt has cracked and groaned and nearly bled to death, but it has not fallen. It bends, but it remembers, and it always finds its way back to the river. The sun rises over Thebes with the confidence of a kingdom reborn. It gleams across limestone courtyards, bounces off temple walls, and throws long shadows down the causeways of a place that's no longer just a city. It's the city, the center, the heart. You feel it the moment you step off the ferry. Thebes is no longer just surviving, it's thriving. You've come here with your grandson, who was recently recruited to join a new building project. Something big. The royal scribes have summoned skilled workers from all over the Nile Valley, and his name came up on a dusty old list you helped write years ago. You figured you'd tag along, see what's become of Egypt now that the chaos has finally mostly settled down. It's Menuet Tepu's doing. He's the one who united the two lands, beat back the pretenders from the north, and planted his banner not just in Thebes, but in the minds of the people. They call him he who brings peace. And for once, they're not being poetic. Roads are open again. Trade is flowing. Temples are being rebuilt, not just as piles of stone, but as functioning, living centers of worship. His mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is something new, something different, carved into the cliffs like it grew there. You've never seen anything like it. Instead of piling blocks into a pyramid, he's built with space, colonnades, terraces, open courtyards that welcome the sun instead of blocking it. Your grandson is working on one of the ramps, and even he admits it's harder than stones. The columns have to sing, he says, half joking, half serious. If they don't sing, the gods won't come. Here's your historical fact. Menuet is considered the founder of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's second great golden age. His reunification of the country wasn't just political, it was spiritual. His temple was one of the first major projects to integrate the natural landscape into its design, setting the architectural tone for future pharaohs like Hatshepsut. You were there at the dawn of pyramids. Now you're watching their evolution. Here's your oddball detail. The temple includes a fake entrance, a decoy meant to confuse tomb robbers, but someone painted "this isn't the real door" beside it in hastily scrolled hieroglyphs, either a joke or a warning or both. He once asked a scribe about it. He just smiled and said, "Sometimes we don't want the gods to find us right away." And now the scholarly tangle. Why did Mortepu break from pyramid building? Was it practical, symbolic, a rejection of Old Kingdom hubris? Some scholars think he wanted to distance himself from the chaos that followed Khufu and Pepe. Others argue that integrating the landscape into the architecture was a theological statement, that the cliffs themselves were divine. You think maybe he just liked the view. Thebes is buzzing. You've never seen so many workshops, so many carts rattling down dusty roads, so many scribes hunched over reed pens muttering about back pay. There's a new sense of movement of Egypt stretching its limbs after a long sleep. Foreign traders have returned. You pass Canaanite merchants offering turquoise and Nubian diplomats dressed in leopard skins and gold. There's talk of reopening mines, rebuilding fortresses in the Sinai, sending expeditions to Punt for incense and blackwood. You even get a glimpse of the king himself. It's brief. He's riding in a chariot, surrounded by fan-bearers and guards, but the crowd falls silent as he passes. He's older now, battle-worn, but still commanding. He nods to the crowd once, and it's as if a gust of wind passes through the people. You wonder if he sees what he's built, or if he's already dreaming of what comes next. You rent a tiny mud brick room near the river, close enough to hear the oars of the night barges, but far enough to avoid the smell of the tannery. Each evening, you join your grandson by a fire, sharing bread and stories. He's learning fast. He tells you about limestone veins that crack under pressure, about 4 men who count every chisel stroke, about workers who sing as they hammer, the rhythm keeping time like a priest's drumbeat. He shows you a fragment of a wall relief he helped smooth, a depiction of the pharaoh smiting enemies. Classic pose, but with a strange addition. A small child hiding behind the king's leg. That's new, he says. A symbol of protection, I think. You nod, thinking back to old tombs where kings were shown alone, massive, invincible. Maybe the gods are softening. Or maybe the artists are just bolder now. You spend your days wandering Thebes. You visit a library, really just a storm of scrolls and tablets, and speak to a blind scribe who recites the names of gods like poetry. You stop by a perfume stall and breathe in the sticky sweetness of blue lotus oil. You watch dancers in the marketplace mimic the movements of birds, each twist of the wrist like a spell. Egypt is alive in a way it hasn't been in generations. One morning, a young priestess offers you a blessing. She paints a blue circle on your palm, protection from what she calls the unfinished journey. You thank her, and she smiles without asking for payment. "We don't charge the elders," she says. "You walked us here." Your grandson starts coming home later each night, hand-stained, eyes bright. He's found his rhythm. You see yourself in him, in the way he looks at unfinished stone and imagines what it could become. You tell him that once you worked on Khufu's pyramid. He laughs. "Sure, Grandpa, and I'm the son of Ra." But the next day, he tells the story to his friends anyway. You receive a letter from a cousin in the north. Memphis is quiet, still a shadow of its former glory, but not abandoned. They're rebuilding slowly. Some say a new line of kings will rise there. Others say the priests of Amun and thieves are too powerful now that they'll never let another dynasty rule from the north. You sip your beer and wonder who's right and whether it matters. As long as the river flows, Egypt endures. At night, thieves glows. Torches flicker across the water. You sit on the rooftop of your rented room, wrapped in a linen shawl, and listen to the city breathe. Somewhere below, a flute plays a melody you haven't heard in decades. You hum along softly. You've seen Egypt break, and you've seen it heal. Not all at once, not cleanly, but with patience, with sweat, with memory. The gods come and go. The crowns change shape, but the people keep building. You think of that blue circle on your hand. You think of false doors and painted monkeys, of bent pyramids and sacred ramps. You think of names scratched into stone and voices that still echo from tomb walls. You think maybe this is what eternity really is. Not gold, not thrones, but continuity. A grandson building in the city his grandfather helped rebuild. A scarred land finding its rhythm again. Egypt always becoming. You wake before the sun rises as usual. The air in Thebes is still cool, though it won't stay that way. Already the streets are stirring. Temple servants fetching water, scribes brushing sand from scrolls, work crews gathering at the edges of building sites. Your grandson is gone before you even sit up. His breakfast unfinished and his tools already slung over his shoulder. He's part of the new order now, what they're calling the Middle Kingdom machine. It's been Pes since Menuetipu unified the two lands, and Egypt is finally beginning to feel like itself again. The chaos of the first intermediate period has faded into something people now call the Troubles. Like a long fever, no one wants to describe too closely. But you remember warlords burning fields, tax records scrolled in blood, and temples stripped down to bare stone. You don't correct the younger ones when they act like this new era sprang up, fully formed like lotus from mud. Let them believe it. Let them build their lives in peace. Now it's Amanhatu on the throne, a former vizier who seized power after the last of Menuhotep's line fizzled out. The transition wasn't exactly smooth. You heard rumors of assassinations, shadowy priesthoods, and military uprisings, but Egypt's always been dramatic when dynasties change. What matters is that he's strong, organized, ruthless maybe, and obsessed with control. His biggest move, he shifted the capital north to a brand new city, Ikawi, near the Fam. A risky move and a symbolic one. He's saying that Egypt doesn't belong to Thebes or Memphis. It belongs to him. You don't know what the new capital looks like, just that it's bustling with scribes, officials, and an entire bureaucratic machine large enough to file the soul out of a falcon. You almost went there once, but Thebes is your home now. Too much dust in your joints to move. Your grandson sends you messages on a strayer, little shards of pottery scrolled with quick notes. He's been assigned to a Kanap Canal project near the fire, helping redirect water from the Nile into a vast basin that, when it works, will transform a marsh into rich farmland. We're making the land itself a bay, he writes. Even the crocodiles are confused. That's your historical fact. A&M Hatvon launched a massive irrigation project in the Fam, a low-lying region that had always teased Egypt with its potential, with canals and dikes. He turned it into a breadbasket. More wheat, more taxes, more power. The Middle Kingdom thrived not just on gold and conquest, but on infrastructure. Egypt was getting smarter. And your weird fact for tonight, Eminem Hat, I also wrote or had written for him one of Egypt's earliest pieces of political propaganda. The Instructions of A&M Hat. It's a poem, a warning, a lecture written as if the dead king is speaking to his son. Trust no one, Armit says. Not even your closest friends, not even your own guards. It's paranoid and poetic. You copied it once for a nobleman's tomb and had to pause halfway through. The line that got you. Men smile at you with knives beneath their tongues. You're not sure if it's wisdom or madness, maybe both. Now, the scholars argue, because of course they do, about whether Eminem Hat was loved or feared. His court was filled with scribes and thinkers, but also spies and secret trials. Some see him as a reformer who pulled Egypt back from the brink. Others paint him as a control freak who trusted no one and died alone. You once met an old palace servant who claimed Eminem Hat was killed in his sleep by his own bodyguards. Then again, that man also claimed he invented beer. So, grain of salt. But whatever you believe, Amonhat did something clever before his end. He made his son Sinus the Rest co-regent, not after his death, but during his own reign. It was the first time Egypt had an official dual rule, father and son on the throne at once. At first, people were skeptical. Now it's hailed as genius. Smooth transition, no power vacuum, no civil war. Egypt finally figured out how to pass the baton without tripping over its own sandals. And what a baton it is. Senret, he is no placeholder prince. He's sharp, experienced, and already commanding armies. Under his joint reign with his father and then on his own, Egypt blossoms. Art, literature, architecture, all refined, perfected, reimagined. Temples become more elegant, reliefs more realistic. You once visited a shrine he commissioned outside Thebes and ran your hand across the carved face of a scribe. The expression slightly smug, deeply human. You've never forgotten it. Trade expands too. You see new faces in Theban markets, Nubians with gold and incense, Levantines with cedar wood and fancy beads. Egypt's borders stretch again, not just with spears, but with diplomacy and treaties. Even the Sinai mines reopen. Turquoise starts flowing like water. You wear a bit of it on a cord around your wrist. It matches your veins. Back home, life is stable. That's the real gift of this era. Not glory, not immortality, but peace. Fields are planted and harvested on time. Taxes are predictable. Roads are mostly safe. You spend your days teaching younger workers how to balance a chisel just right, how to blend pigments for murals, how to argue with a foreman without losing your fingers. Your old hands don't work like they used to. The joints swell, your grip falters, but your eyes still sharp. You catch a mistake in a carto from weeks of shame. He thanks you with a loaf of barley bread and a cup of date beer so strong it makes you forget your own name for an hour. Sometimes you sit by the river and think about how much Egypt has changed. The pyramids are still there, of course, casting their long shadows across time, but no one's building giants like Khufu anymore. Instead, the kings are carving legacy into policy, into roads and texts, into the little things. You used to think eternity was made of stone. Now you're not so sure. Maybe it's paper. Maybe it's stories. Your grandson comes home for a visit, taller than you now, his shoulders broad from hauling water jars and dragging survey ropes through the mud. He tells you about his team's latest project, a granary complex with channels for airflow and storage bins lined in baked clay. You listen, smiling, thinking this is how we win. Not by fighting, by feeding. He asks you to bless his tools. You press your fingers to each one, mutter a few old words you barely remember, and tie a scrap of linen around the handle of his chisel. You tell him, strike true, leave your name behind. He nods, doesn't laugh, he understands. That night, the sky above Thebes is clear. The stars will slowly, as if remembering their place. You see Orion again, Osiris reborn. The Nile murmurs beside you like a patient old god, and for the first time in a long time, you feel like Egypt is not just surviving. It's becoming something new. Not a kingdom of kings, a kingdom of builders. You're back on the road again. Though this time your knees complain more than they used to, and your pack seems to have grown heavier by magic or age. Probably age. You're headed north, not all the way to Memphis, but to a quiet estate tucked between the river and a cliff wall outside a small town. The journey was unexpected. You got a message hand-delivered on papyrus, sealed with the mark of a high official. The request to help decorate a tomb, but not just any tomb. The tomb of Sinuhe. You'd heard the name whispered before, a former court official, trusted advisor to the king, who disappeared one day without a word, gone like wind over the dunes. For years, people speculated. Was he kidnapped, murdered, exiled? But then he came back quietly, humbly, and asked only for a proper tomb so he could rest where his ancestors did. You're not entirely sure why you were asked, but the letter called you a master of old hands. You chuckle at that. When you arrive, Sinue is already there. Old, thin, wrapped in layers of linen, with eyes that have seen too many sunsets. He greets you with a slow bow and thanks you for coming. I heard, he says. You've painted men into eternity before. You nod once or twice. He doesn't ask for gold leaf or grand statues. No pyramid, no temple, just a chamber carved into the cliffside and a series of scenes, moments from his strange life. And so you begin with your assistant setting up pigments and scaffolds. You listen to Sinuhe dictate the story he once told, one memory at a time. Here's your historical fact. The tale of Sinuhe is one of the most famous works of ancient Egyptian literature, possibly written during the reign of Senosvither. It tells the story of an official who flees Egypt after the king's assassination, lives in exile for decades in foreign lands, and eventually returns to die in peace. It's part autobiography, part moral tale, and part national myth. Here's your quirky one. Some versions of the tale include exaggerated accounts of Sinhu's adventures, fighting giants, living with desert tribes, even wrestling lions. You ask him about those parts, he just smiles. People like stories with teeth, he says, and the scholarly debate. Some argue Sino was a real person. Others say he was a fictional standee, a symbol of Egypt's longing for order and return during the Middle Kingdom. Was he a political exile, a spy, a moral example? You don't know, and honestly, you don't care. You're just here to paint his journey. The first wall shows him fleeing the palace, startled by the whispers of the king's death. He's in motion, legs stretched midun, his face turned over his shoulder as if checking whether Egypt herself is chasing him. On another wall, you paint him in the desert, lean, sunburned, bartering with nomads for water. He's never quite at rest, always looking back. He watches you work for hours, then disappears for days. You find him one evening sitting by the Nile, watching birds drift across the surface. I missed this most, he says. The smell of the river, the silence. You nod. You understand. You've never left Egypt, but you know the feeling of distance, of being apart from the life you once knew. Sinoi doesn't talk much about the years away, but the things he asks you to paint say plenty. Lonely mountains, foreign markets, battles fought under foreign stars. One scene shows him holding a bow, defending a strange land from raiders. You make his posture proud, but not boastful. He approves. Eventually, the story turns. Sinohi receives a message from the pharaoh, an invitation, no, a forgiveness. He returns home. You paint this moment with care, the boat gliding toward the palace, the river flat as glass, the palace in the distance glowing gold in the light of Ra. On Sinohuru's face, you paint no fear, only peace. He asks for one final scene, his tomb already complete, already quiet, as though you're looking ahead through the veil. Make it simple. He says, I don't need a kingdom, just a place to sleep. You pause while working, brush in hand, and ask him, why did you leave? He doesn't answer right away. Then he says, sometimes when the wind changes, the body moves before the mind understands. I loved Egypt too much to see her broken, and I was afraid. He looks up at the painted ceiling, stars beginning to take shape. Fear turns men into ghosts, but memory brings them home. You don't press him after that. The work takes weeks, months. Your hands ache, your back is bent, but you've never painted with such care. You teach your assistants how to mix deeper blues, how to get the red of the desert just right. You catch them listening to Sin's stories, whispering parts to each other like gossip. You learn more than you expect about exile, about redemption, about longing, and about Egypt. Not the Egypt of pyramids or golden thrones, but the Egypt that lives in every village, every name carved on every wall. The Egypt that calls you home. No matter how far you've wandered when the tomb is finished, there is no grand ceremony. Just Sanohi standing at the entrance wrapped in white, placing his palm gently on the doorway before stepping inside. He turns to you once more and says, "You gave me more than pictures. You gave me back my place in the story." Later, you hear he passed quietly in his sleep, the Nile breeze drifting through the chamber like a final breath. They sealed the tomb without a curse, without a guard, without a trap, just his name and the words, "He returned." You go back to Thieves, quiet. You don't tell many people about the job. But when your grandson asks what the tomb was like, you say simply, "It was honest." And he nods like, "That's enough." At night, you think of that painted boat still sailing, still heading toward home. It starts with the sound of hooves and the deep clattering creak of unfamiliar wheels rolling over stone roads that were never built for such noise. You hear it first in the markets, whispers of strange invaders riding into the delta on beasts as fast as they are loud. Then you see them yourself months later, men with curled beards, sharper weapons, and a terrifying mastery of movement. They don't walk into Egypt, they ride in on chariots. No one had seen anything like them before. Two-wheeled machines drawn by horses with warriors balanced on the back like desert hawks. You remember watching one roll past a line of local soldiers who had nothing but spears and courage. The look on their faces wasn't fear, it was confusion. Egypt had never faced this kind of speed before. War here had always been slow, personal, brutal. But this was a blur of dust and arrows. These invaders, these chieftains of foreign lands, are what we now call the Hyksos, a name that means rulers of foreign countries. Though in daily conversation you hear them called worse. They come from the northeast, likely from the Levant, bringing with them not just chariots, but new weapons, composite bows, curved scimitars, and armor stitched from leather and bronze scales. They settle in the delta, establishing their capital at Avaris, and for the first time in 1,000 years, a foreign power sits on the throne of Lower Egypt. Your historical fact: the Hyksos were not simply savage invaders. They were skilled administrators and builders who adopted many Egyptian customs while introducing game-changing technology. Their presence marks the Second Intermediate Period, a time of foreign rule in Egypt. And while they never controlled the entire country, their influence reshaped it profoundly. Your quirky tidbit: the Hyksos brought horses to Egypt along with the chariot. Egyptians had no word for horse before this. They borrowed the Semitic word sus, and once people saw what a horse could do, they weren't going back to oxen anytime soon. You once tried to approach one, it sneezed in your face, and you fell over backward, glorious. Now for the academic squabble. Some scholars argue the Hyksos were violent conquerors who stormed into Egypt and burned their way to power. Others suggest they rose gradually, first as immigrants and traders who eventually took advantage of a weakened state to seize control. You believe it was both. You saw the trickle before the flood. Canaanite traders settling in the delta, blending in, becoming neighbors. Then when Egypt faltered, they filled the vacuum. Smart, ruthless, efficient. You don't fight them, of course. You're too old, too stiff, too protective of your remaining fingers. But you work near them. You see their influence firsthand. Hyksos rulers issue decrees in Egyptian, build temples to Egyptian gods, even mimic royal art styles. But the difference is always there in the shape of their helmets, the tightness of their military drills, the foreign music drifting out of their palaces. And yet Egypt doesn't collapse. The Thean kings, local rulers of the south, refuse to bow. They pay tribute for a while, sure, but they also prepare quietly, patiently. You hear rumors of secret military training in desert forts and of experiments with new bows, of scouts riding through the hills to learn how to fight like the Hyksos. One morning, your grandson returns from the temple complex in Thebes, eyes wide, voice hushed. "There are building chariots now," he says. "Ours." Of course they are. Thebes becomes a furnace of ambition. You feel it in the stone courtyards, in the drills bull held by temple guards, in the way the local nobles sharpen their words like knives. There's one name that begins to rise above the rest: Secondrao, a southern king with fire in his blood and a hatred for the Hyksos so hot it could melt bronze. You catch sight of him once in a procession. Scarred face, quick eyes, muscles tight as if he's always ready to leap into battle. He doesn't look like the golden pharaohs of old. He looks tired and determined. It's said that the Hyksos king at Avar sends him a message mocking his pet hippos, claiming they're too loud at night. Thinly veiled insult, political theater. Second Enra sends back silence, then begins preparing for war. You don't live long enough to see the fighting, but you hear enough to know it's coming. Soldiers march through Thebes in tighter formations. Temple treasuries are emptied to fund arms and armor. The priesthood of Amun grows stronger, aligning itself with the war effort. Even your grandson is conscripted, not to fight, but to build stables and weapon stockpiles. Here's something chilling. Years later, Secondra's mummy is found with massive wounds on the skull. Axe blows, forehead gashes, no signs of healing. He died violently, probably in battle, maybe even in the capture. You helped paint heroic scenes on the walls of his senat, but the truth is etched into his bones. He went down swinging, and then the torches passed. To his son Chamos, who continues the resistance, and then to Amos, who finishes it. But we're not there yet. For now, you watch Egypt absorb foreign ideas while quietly sharpening its claws. You see artisans copying Hyksos metalwork. You see old nobles studying foreign dialects. You see the tension building like a storm cloud pregnant with arrows. At night, you hear hooves in the distance, not charging this time, just passing patrols. Thebes is waking up not just to survive, but to retake what was lost. Your grandson tells you one night, half whispered in the dark, "We're going to push them back all the way to the sea." You believe him because Egypt doesn't, for Egypt doesn't forgive. It waits, learns, and when the time is right, it rides. The drumbeat of war doesn't come all at once. It starts like a heartbeat, quickening, quiet, almost imperceptible, until suddenly it's the only sound in the room. Thebes is no longer just a city of priests and stonecutters. It's a war machine now. And every chisel stroke, every grain sack, every whispered prayer feeds the furnace. You can feel it in the market where bronze is more expensive than beer, in the workshops where chariot wheels outnumber baskets, in the temples where gods are asked not just for harvests, but for victory. You remember Second Enre and how his cracked skull told a story no mural ever dared. His son Chamos is cut from the same hard stone. You never meet him, but you see the messengers ride through town with his decrees posted like proud scars across doorways. We will drive the foreigner from our land. Simple, clear. And then he does something bolder. He marches. Camosa rides north with a small but brutal army. Theban chariots, local levies, foreign mercenaries hired from Nubia, and the desert tribes. You hear the story secondhand at first. How he torched Hyksos strongholds in Middle Egypt. How he pushed all the way to the edge of Avaris before pulling back. He doesn't conquer the delta, not yet. But he sends a message that echoes all the way to the sea. Egypt is done bowing, then silence. Camosa dies suddenly, young, and the details are murky. Assassination, disease, or just bad luck on the wrong campaign. No one's sure. You feel the mood in Thebes shift. The fear returns just for a moment, but then comes the next name, a boy, barely old enough to grip a bow, Akhmos. At first, you doubt him. Everyone does. He's too young, too soft, raised in a palace dripping with incense and caution, but behind those wide eyes is something steelier than anyone expected. His regents rule in his name for a time. His mother, Queen Autip, leads the charge, holding the kingdom together with sheer will. But Amos doesn't stay a puppet for long. By the time he takes full control, he's already trained, hardened, and filled with purpose. Said he will finish what his father and brother started. You don't see him in battle, of course, but you feel the ripple. He moves like floodwater, slow at first, then unstoppable. Amos reforms the army, makes deals with Nubian allies, brings in weaponsmiths from the Levant. You watch chariot after chariot roll past your town. You hear hammering all night from the forges. You smell burning pitch and fear into the air. Here's your historical fact, Armos. I successfully drove the Hyksos out of Egypt, besieging Avaris and eventually chasing them all the way into Canaan. His reign marks the start of the new kingdom, the most powerful and expansive era Egypt will ever know. He reunifies Egypt, not just in name but in spirit, and begins a dynasty that will produce gods on earth. Your quirky fact. When the Hyksos stronghold at Avaris was finally taken, Egyptian forces reportedly used a mix of siege tactics, psychological warfare, and even boiling oil. That's right, oil heated in massive cauldrons poured over the city's walls and defenders. You once helped paint a tomb mural that hinted at it, though the overseer made you tone it down for the kids and the scholarly debate. Some argue that Amos's victory was less about conquest and more about diplomacy, that he may have negotiated partial surrenders or at least leveraged internal Hyksos divisions. Others insist it was brute force, pure and simple. You suspect it was both. Egypt doesn't do either or. It always fights with one hand and negotiates with the other. After Avaris falls, there's still one final stronghold, Sherahan in Canaan. The Hyksos flee there, thinking themselves safe. They aren't. Armos chases them across the Sinai, lays siege, and after 3 brutal years, flattens the city. No mercy, no delays, no survivors. Egypt doesn't just push the invaders out, it follows them home and burns the door shut. Back in Thebes, the celebration is cautious at first. You're there when the first victory procession winds through the streets. Chariots decorated in gold, banners flapping with the double crown of the unified land. Amos rides at the front. No longer a boy. He doesn't wave. He doesn't need to. The people are already chanting his name. You see something familiar in his eyes, something you saw once in Nefru, in Khufu, in Menuetip. Not joy, not pride, just focus. Egypt's rebirth is fragile, and he knows it. But he doesn't stop with reunification. Amos turns inward, rebuilding temples, re-establishing priesthoods, repairing irrigation canals destroyed in the wars. The gods, long neglected or placated with token offerings, are honored again with full ceremonies. Amun especially rises like a storm cloud above the rest. His temples expand, his priests grow louder, and before long he's not just a local wind god, he's the god. And now Egypt shifts. You can feel it beneath your feet like a tectonic movement. For the first time in centuries, Egypt isn't defending itself. It's expanding. It wants to own the horizon again. The military isn't disbanded, it's polished. Egypt becomes a kingdom of soldiers, administrators, diplomats, and dreamers. The Nile flows a little prouder now. You help restore a temple wall that had been cracked during the Hyksos occupation. As you paint over old soot stains, a young girl beside you hums a new song, one praising Armos, not just as a king, but as a liberator. The lyrics are awkward, rhyming enemy with sandy sea, but the spirit is there. Egypt is writing itself new hymns. Your grandson returns from one of the Nubian campaigns with a bronze dagger and a story about crocodiles bigger than boats. You tell him to stop lying, but you also sharpen the blade for him just in case. He shows you a scar on his shoulder, a slice from a Hyksos arrow, now healed. You trace it with your fingers and whisper the name of protective spirit, just like your mother did for you once. At night, you sit beneath a sky thick with stars and feel something you haven't in years. Stability. And not the stillness of the old kingdom, but a living, moving rhythm. Egypt is breathing again. Chest rising with pride, exhaling the smoke of old fires. You know what comes next? Glory Empire pharaohs who will stretch their hands across deserts and mountains and return with tribute piled like hills. But you also know this. It started with fear, with loss, with patience, with one family and thieves refusing to kneel. You take a small stone and carve something simple into it. A name, a year, a tiny chariot with curved blades. You bury it under your threshold, not to be found, but to be remembered. Because Egypt is whole again, and it's just getting started. You wake to a drumbeat that's not for war for once. It's for ceremony, for celebration, for something unprecedented, maybe even unthinkable. Word has spread quietly at first, and then in growing waves like the Nile, breaking its banks. Egypt's next pharaoh is not a warrior prince, not a god-king's son, not even a man. She's a woman, and you're still alive to see it. Her name is Hatshepsut, and her bloodline is royal. That much is clear. Daughter of Thutmose I, wife of Thutmose II, regent for the child Thutmose III. But she's not content to be the quiet queen in the background. She wears the crown. She speaks as pharaoh. She claims divine birth. And this part catches in your throat. She wears the false beard. You remember the first time you see her in procession? At first, it's confusing. She's dressed in traditional male regalia, linen, kilt, broad collar, headdress, crooked flail. But her face is unmistakably feminine, strong-jawed but delicate. Her posture is perfect, her gaze calm, absolute. The crowd doesn't cheer like they do for the warriors. They bow deeply, respectfully. You hear murmurs, of course. Not everyone accepts her. Some grumble that a woman can't be pharaoh, that Mott cosmic order has been twisted. Others say she's only keeping the throne warm for the boy king Thutmose should. But those people don't build temples. And she does. Oh, she builds. Here's your historical fact. Hatshepsut reigned for roughly 2 decades during Egypt's 18th dynasty, one of the most prosperous and artistically vibrant periods in its history. Rather than focus on conquest, she turned Egypt inward on economy, trade, and architectural splendor. She styled herself King of Upper and Lower Egypt, and inscriptions always refer to her with male titles. But she never disguised her identity. She redefined it. Your fringe fact. She sent an expedition to the fabled land of Punt, a place so legendary and shrouded in myth that modern scholars still argue about where it was. Somalia, Yemen, the Horn of Africa, wherever it was, Egypt hadn't visited it in centuries. Hatshepsut reopened that door, and what came back was a treasure haul. Incense trees, ebony, ivory, gold, panther skin, even live baboons. You help unload some of those goods, and the smell of myrrh lingers in your nose for weeks. And now the scholarly chaos. Was Hatshep's power hungry, or simply preserving Egypt during a time when her stepson was too young to rule? Did she co-rule with Thutmose III in harmony, or overshadow him? Some say she usurped the throne. Others argue she saved it. Later pharaohs would try to erase her name from monuments, as if pretending she hadn't existed would undo what she'd built. But the stones remember, and so do you. You're working at Deir el-Bahari again, back at that breathtaking cliffside where long ago you helped decorate the tomb of Sinuhe. Now, Hatshepsut is reshaping the entire landscape. Her mortuary temple rises in terraces that seem to float and supported by rows of slender square columns. The design is unlike anything Egypt has ever seen, harmonious, symmetrical, and daringly modern. You carve scenes of the Punt expedition into one of the lower colonnades. There's Queen Adi of Punt, large and imposing, carried on a donkey. You laugh when you first sketch her, but then Hatshepsut's overseer says, "Carve her with dignity. She is our partner, not our prize." You nod and smooth out the lines. You've never heard a pharaoh speak of partnership before. Life in Thebes is rich, peaceful. For once, the forges are cold. The weapons gather dust. People care more about paint than pitch, about spices more than spears. The granaries are full. Temples are growing like weeds. Amun's priesthood is swelling too, powerful, deeply tied to Hatshepsut's rule. She claims that Amun himself appeared to her mother in a dream, fathered her, and declared she would be king, not queen. She says in every inscription, king, and yet she never hides her womanhood. You see her statues slowly change over the years, starting with soft curves, eventually adopting the strong square jaw and masculine features of the traditional pharaoh, but the eye's always hers, sharp, patient, confident, in a way that doesn't require shouting. You meet a young apprentice one afternoon who tells you earnestly, "If Hatshepsut can be king, then maybe I can be a scribe one day, even though my father's just a potter." You smile and hand him a chisel. "Try carving first," you say. Scribes don't get calluses. Even in old age, you feel invigorated. There's something about her reign, calm but ambitious, that brings out the better part of Egypt. You notice it in how people talk to each other in the street. More laughter, less grumbling. Even the cats seem smugger, if that's possible. But you hear the whispers, too, that the boy king, now growing into a man, is watching. That Thutmose III bides his time studying military tactics, building alliances. You wonder if there will be tension, maybe even rebellion. But Hatshepsut doesn't seem worried. She places him on monuments beside her, includes him in royal imagery, never as an equal, but never as an enemy. One evening, you're invited to a dedication ceremony at Karnak Temple. You've earned the honor through decades of service, though your knees nearly quit on the long walk. You stand among rows of white-robed priests as the sunset glows blood orange behind the stone pylons. The obelisks she's erected are taller than anything you've ever seen. Two slender spears of rose granite, carved with her names and praises to her moon. As the drums echo through the sacred courtyard, you realize you're watching something more than a ritual. You're witnessing a rewriting of the rules. Egypt isn't breaking from its past, it's expanding it, stretching Mat into a shape that includes more than kings and conquest. It now includes her, a woman who called herself king, a builder, a dreamer. You stand there in silence long after the ceremony ends, listening to the fading chant of the priests. You look up at the obelisks glowing in the moonlight and wonder how long they'll stand. If one day someone will try to tear them down, erase her name, pretend it never happened, but they'll fail because the stones remember, and so do you. You walk home through the quiet streets of Thebes, past homes lit by oil lamps and cats lounging in doorways. A child plays with a wooden toy shaped like a boat. Someone hums a song about the return of trade ships. Somewhere far off, you hear the river. Hatshepsut reigns, Egypt breathes, and for the first time in decades, you don't dream of war. You dream of incense trees and granite towers and a woman who dared to rule like a man and better than most who tried. You don't see the boy coming. Not at first. You're still basking in the quiet brilliance of Hatshepsut's reign. Temples rising, trade flowing, peace holding like the seams of a well-stitched tunic. But empires don't pause and kings don't stay young forever. And somewhere behind the veil of incense and the whisper of flutes, the boy grows up. Thutmose III, the stepson, the shadow, the son of a minor queen whose blood was royal enough to matter, but not quite bright enough to eclipse the flame of Hatshepsut. For years he waited in the wings, crowned in title but caged in power. Mentioned on stelae like an afterthought, depicted beside his regent aunt like a student beside a teacher. You wondered how he felt about it. The difference, the delay, you wonder if it burned. It must have, because when Hatshepsut dies quietly without scandal or spectacle, Thutmose III does not just step into power. He erupts. It's like the floodwaters of the Nile have been dammed for too long, and now they come crashing through every channel. You hear the rumors first. Statues of Hatshepsut mysteriously disappear. Her name chiseled off temple walls, cartouches recarved. At first, you think it's politics, maybe jealousy. But then you hear he's planning a military campaign, a massive one. And suddenly, it all makes sense. He wasn't just waiting, he was training. And now Egypt's army is moving. Here's your historical fact. Thutmose III is considered one of the greatest military pharaohs in Egypt's history. He led at least 17 recorded campaigns during his reign, expanding Egyptian control into Canaan, Syria, and Nubia, and establishing an empire that stretched further than any before. His battle at Megiddo marks the first recorded military conflict in history with detailed strategy and outcome. And you get pulled into it again. Your grandson, now a commander, comes home with orders. You're to travel north, not to fight, but to serve in an administrative role in the queue. Supply lines. You laugh. So now I'm a glorified grain accountant. He shrugs. It's either that or chariot repair, and your back isn't up for wheels anymore. Fair enough. The army moves fast, more organized than anything you've seen. Chariots in rows, archers in units, bronze glinting like fish scales under the sun. There are war drums, banners of falcons and cobras, and a mood among the men that you recognize from your younger years. The giddy, nervous energy of a nation stepping back into power. You cross the Sinai, and a long, snaking line of carts and pack animals. Dust clouds choke the air. Flies swarm, but the pace never slows. You hear the word Megiddo over and over, a fortified city of rebellious princes who have turned against Egyptian rule. The old vassals have grown bold during Hatshepsut's peace. They think Egypt has grown soft. They're about to find out otherwise. And now your quirky fact. At the Battle of Megiddo, Thutmose III chose a risky path, marching his army through a narrow mountain pass instead of taking the safer, longer routes. His generals advised against it. He ignored them. The risk paid off. The enemy was completely surprised, and Egypt won the field. The enemy leaders even locked themselves inside the city out of panic, forcing a siege that lasted 7 months. You were there when the food started to rot in the carts outside the city walls. The scholarly debate. Some argue that Thutmose' erasure of Hatshepsut wasn't personal, it was political, that he needed to assert legitimacy and couldn't afford to share a royal legacy with a female predecessor, no matter how capable she was. Others believe it was revenge. Years of being sidelined, turned into a puppet, used as decoration. The kind of insult you don't forget, even when the one who inflicted it is long dead. You saw how quickly her name vanished from the temple columns. You don't think it was just paperwork. After Megiddo, Egypt doesn't just win, it absorbs. City after city bows, treaties are signed, tribute flows south like floodwaters, gold, cedar, lapis, lazuli, even trained monkeys and foreign dancers. You're reassigned to the administration of one such region in Canaan, helping distribute rations and record inventories. You sit in a stone chamber marking deliveries of bread, beer, and chariot parts, listening to local leaders argue in broken Egyptian and thick accents. It's exhausting, but you understand the importance. Empires aren't built on blood alone. They need bureaucracy. Back in Egypt, temples are booming. Every victory comes with a new column, a new wall of inscriptions, a new monument to the glory of the warrior pharaoh. Karnak grows again, sprouting new pylons and sanctuaries. Thutmose dedicates everything to Amun, his victories, his spoils, even his breath. The gods' temples are now swollen with wealth, the priesthood of Amun more powerful than ever. You worry about that, just a little, but mostly you're too tired to care. Your grandson writes to say he's been promoted chief logistics officer for Nubian campaigns. He's proud. You're proud. He has his own house now, his own family, and every now and then he sends you a clay jar of beer from the Delta. Tastes different, sweeter, lighter, like ambition in liquid form. You return to Thebes older, slower, but not broken. You find your old workshop still standing. You dust off your tools just for the feel of them. You take on a few apprentices, mostly to keep your fingers moving and your brain from melting under the summer sun. One of them asks you, "What was the greatest battle you ever saw?" You don't answer right away. You think of Megiddo. You think of the siege. You think of watching enemy princes surrender one by one, heads bowed, tongues thick with dust. But then you think of Hatshepsut's temple, still standing, still defiant. You say, "I saw a woman rule as a man." That was the greatest. The apprentice laughs, but not mockingly, just surprised. You teach him to chisel in straight lines. You help carve those triumphs into temple walls, even as the memory of Hatshepsut fades. You slip her symbol just once into the hem of a robe on a statue, tiny, hidden, but real. At night you watch the stars and wonder how many names will remain. The conquerors, the builders, the erased. Egypt remembers in layers like sandstone. And you, dusty and cracked but still standing, are one of its oldest pages. The gods have grown quiet, but the gold hasn't hit. It flows now like never before. Out of mines, out of Nubia, out of tribute piles tall enough to block the morning sun. You sit in a shaded courtyard, sipping a mug of sweet beer, listening to a tax official complain about how there isn't enough room to store it all. "We're running out of temple vaults," he moans like it is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone. You've lived long enough to see Egypt rise and fall and rise again. Now you're living through its golden glow. The reign of Amenhotep II, son of Thutmose IV, grandson of Thutmose III, and a king who seems less interested in conquest and more obsessed with comfort, diplomacy, and divine approval. Not that you mind. At your age, war just sounds like bad knees and expensive funerals. Peace, on the other hand, you'll take it. Amenhotep III isn't just a king, he's the king. Regal, radiant, built like a statue, and already worshipped as a living god before he dies. His palaces shimmer with imported lapis. His robes smell of cedar and myrrh. His court is filled with foreign envoys, silk-road scribes, and more entertainers than a festival parade. You saw him once from a distance, riding in a gilded chariot down a Theban street flanked by guards with gold-plated armor. Even the horses looked smug. But don't mistake him for soft. Amenhotep rules with calculation. He doesn't expand Egypt's borders by sword. He does it with marriage contracts and gift exchanges. Dozens of foreign princesses arrive every few years, their caravans heavy with exotic goods and political expectations. You see them stepping down from chariots, their eyes wide, half in awe, half in terror. Most can't even speak Egyptian. Doesn't matter. They won't be giving speeches. Here's your historical fact. Amenhotep III's reign marks the peak of Egypt's wealth and international prestige. He maintained peaceful relations with surrounding kingdoms, Mitanni, Babylon, Hatti, largely through an elaborate system of diplomatic correspondence now known as the Amanna letters. These clay tablets written in Adyar form are still debated today for their insight into Bronze Age diplomacy. You once helped copy a few, though you didn't understand a word. They paid in figs and linen. Good trade. Now for your odd detail. Amenhotep III issued hundreds of commemorative scarabs, carved beetle-shaped amulets that brag about his achievements, how many lions he hunted, how many foreign princesses he married, how deep the river flooded. You've seen one that says he killed over 100 lions. You're not sure if you believe it. Maybe they were small lions. And the scholarly debate, this one gets messy. Some say Amenhotep III became so deeply invested in ritual and divine status that he began to blur the line between man and God while still alive. Others claim it was all political theater, an image carefully crafted by a brilliant court to unify the empire through spectacle. Was he devout, delusional, or just dazzlingly pragmatic? You suspect all three. He prayed with one hand and counted tribute with the other. Back in Thebes, the city hums with prosperity. Roads are well kept, storehouses overflow, and artists are in demand like never before. You spend your mornings teaching young stoneworkers how to polish diorite and your evenings sketching lotus designs for temple walls. There's even talk of starting a new palace complex on the West Bank. Malkola, a city within a city built to hold the growing splendor of the royal household. You helped design a mural for one of the new reception halls, a river scene full of birds, boats, and offerings to Amun. The court overseer insists on golden ducks. You've never seen a golden duck in your life, but you paint them anyway. It's symbolic, he says. Of what? You don't ask. Temple life is booming, too. Amun's priests have grown fat with land and power. You pass their estates, sprawling compounds with vineyards, granaries, bath, and entire districts full of scribes. It makes you uneasy. The line between king and god is getting fuzzy, and the priests are exploiting the blur. Your granddaughter becomes an acolyte in the House of Life, a scribe school run by Amun's temple. You're proud and she's smart, curious, full of questions. She asked you once, "Do you think the king is a god?" You pause for too long before answering. "He's got enough," you say. She doesn't look convinced. One day, the king announces a festival unlike anything Egypt has seen in generations. His said festival celebrating 30 years on the throne. You remember the old ones? The ones reserved for aging kings trying to prove they still had divine strength. Amenhotep in his 30s and still golden-skinned and sharp-eyed geared doesn't need to prove anything, but he does it anyway, just to remind everyone he can. The celebration stretches for weeks. You attend one of the processions, watching dancers spin in white linen, watching priests haul massive statues of the gods through clouded incense. The king appears at the climax, striding forward in twin crowns, eyes lined with kohl, expression unrateable. The crowd doesn't cheer, they chant. He lives, he reigns. He is raw on earth. You whisper it too, just loud enough to hear your own voice echo back. At night, the streets of Thebes buzz with music and wine. Boats drift across the river, their decks glowing with torchlight. You sit by the shore, watching the lights reflect in the black water, thinking, this is what peace looks like. No blood in the streets, no foreign chariots at the gates, no walls to patch, just quiet prosperity. And a king who knows how to keep the machine running. But something itches at the back of your mind. You remember the way the priests talk now, not about Pharaoh serving the gods, but being gods. You remember the rumors about Ammonite retreating more often to his palaces, surrounding himself with ritualists and dream interpreters. You hear whispers of strange ideas, visions of a new zest sun god, dreams of one name above all Nile names. You ignore it. You're too old to chase omens, but one night your granddaughter comes home with a face like pale stone. There's a new prayer, she says, and it doesn't mention a moon. You just nod because you've lived long enough to know what peace really is in Egypt. A pause before the next revolution. You don't notice the sun changing at first. It still rises over the Nile like it always has, soft gold at dawn, blistering white at noon, bleeding into red at dusk. The gods of the horizon still ride it across the sky in their celestial bark, or so the stories say. But something's off. Not with the sun itself, but with how people talk about it, less as a face, more as a presence. And then it hits you. They've stopped saying Amun. The shift is subtle at first. Priests go quiet, temples close for renovation, hymns are rewritten. You pass a once busy shrine to Amun-Ra one morning and find the door bolted shut, the statue missing. In its place, a sun disk has been painted on the wall, a golden circle with rays that stretch down like fingers. At the end of each ray is a tiny hand, open, reaching. It's beautiful and terrifying. The new king, Amenhotep IV, isn't wasting time. He speaks in quiet tones but moves like a desert storm. Within months of his reign, he's introduced a new god to the people, Aten, the visible sun, the orb itself. No longer cloaked in mythology or hidden in temples, he says Aten is the only god, the true god, and all others dust and shadows. You stare at the painted sun disk and feel something twist in your gut. Not fear, not even anger, just confusion. You've seen Egypt bend before, twist around new rulers, adapt to shifting tides of politics and war. But this isn't adaptation. This is erasure. Here's your historical fact. Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten in the 5th year of his reign and launched a full-blown religious revolution, replacing the traditional polytheistic system with the worship of one deity, Aten. It was arguably the first attempt at monotheism in recorded history, though not in the sense we think of it today. It wasn't about choice, it was about replacement. Your fringe fact. Akhenaten didn't just change the religion, he changed the art. Sculptures of him and his family showed elongated limbs, soft bellies, narrow faces, and slouching posture. No more godlike muscles or stiff poses. He looked human, some say sickly, some say divine in a new way. You once worked on a barrel relief of him holding his daughters under the rays of Ain. He's smiling almost awkward like a father, not a pharaoh. It felt too personal. You flinched as you carved it. And now for the debate, of which there are many. Was Akhenaten a visionary or a madman? Did he truly believe in Aten, or was it a power move to break the grip of Amon's priesthood? Some scholars see him as a religious prophet, others as a narcissist who mistook himself for God. You think back to Amenhotep III's glittering courts and wonder if this is what happens when kings believe their own divinity a little too much. Everything changes. He moves the capital from Thebes to a brand new city carved from desert rock almost overnight. He calls it Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. You help build it or try to. You're older now, but your grandson drags you along as a consultant, says your eye for balance is better than most of the young architects. So there you are, standing in the middle of nowhere, staring at foundation lines drawn in the sand. The city rises fast, too fast. Mud brick homes for artisans, wide roads for processions, open-air temples with no roofs. Because why would the god of the sun want to be shut inside? There are no hidden sanctuaries, no inner chambers. Everything faces the sky. The sun watches everything. You carve again, this time sunbeams instead of ankhs, royal family scenes instead of gods. Akhenaten and his queen, Nefertiti holding hands, playing with their children. It feels intimate, almost uncomfortable. You're used to gods being distant, unknowable. These two eat grapes like everyone else. But the odd thing, you start to like it until the orders come to start defacing the old gods. Temples of Amun are torn down, inscriptions hacked out, faces are gods gouged with chisels. Some workers do it with zeal, others with shame. You do it with shaking hands. One day you're ordered to erase the name of Thutmose from a temple near Karnak. You refuse quietly. You get lucky. The overseer looks the other way, but others aren't spared. Entire generations of gods vanish overnight. Parmut Khonsu scrubbed from walls, even Osiris, even Ra. You start to wonder, is this Egypt anymore? Still, Akhenaten seems content. He walks among his people unescorted, sun pouring over his shaven head. He speaks of love, of harmony, of the Ain's warmth on all creatures. You hear a story of him stopping to help a man who could collapse from the heat stroke. No one knows if it's true, but it spreads. It sticks. His queen Nefertiti becomes the face of the new Egypt. Poised, intelligent, impossibly graceful. You see her once from a distance. She's speaking to workers at a construction site, sleeves rolled, feet dusty. She smiles at something Boy says. You don't hear the words, but you remember the smile. Then the silence begins. No foreign wars, no expansion, no tribute caravans. Egypt stops growing, stops sending ships, stops receiving envoys. The once global empire closes its eyes and turns its face to the sun and nothing else. Your granddaughter, now a teacher at Ayatan's scribal school, tells you that the students no longer learn the names of the old gods. It's just a 10 now, she says, voice flat. All knowledge flows from the light. You want to argue, but what would you even say? You've seen whole dynasties vanish, names erased, gods fall. Maybe this is just another turn of the wheel. But still, it doesn't feel like change. It feels like isolation. At night, the city is eerily quiet. No temple drums, no chants, no flickering torches by the shrines, just moonlight on sand and the feeling that someone is watching. Not someone, something. And then one day, you wake to a thin line of smoke on the horizon. Akhenaten is dead. No procession, no public mourning, just silence. And with it, a chill that Egypt hasn't felt in a long time. You sit outside your home in the city he built, the sun beating down like judgment. The temples are still open, the discs still painted on every wall. But something's gone, a warmth, a certainty, a center. You whisper a prayer to no one in particular. Maybe A10 hears, maybe not. But deep down in a part of your heart, even you don't like to touch, you begin to hope that someone will bring back the old gods. Someone with a strong,